The champagne clinked and then stopped. A ring of coworkers froze around an empty chair, while Daniel Vega one name aloud and kept his voice steady enough to be heard. Claire stood 3 paces back, the thin gold bracelet at her wrist cool through the fabric of her sleeve, and she felt guilt spike like a physical ache behind her breastbone. Guilt had been the engine all night, the reason she had walked the ballroom twice, the reason she had arranged staff seating, the reason she had told herself she would make this evening gentle. The problem was concrete. Dozens of rolls had been cut 2 weeks earlier, and the dinner was supposed to be a balm. Instead, an empty chair had become evidence. Claire scanned faces silently. People looked at the chair the way they looked at an open wound. That sight pushed her into action. Someone raised a glass as a small ritual. Daniel's chin dipped once before he spoke. "For Jared Kim," he said. "For Jared." Ava Morales read the room and swallowed. She stepped closer to Daniel and touched his elbow. Claire watched Ava's hand, the way her fingers rested lightly, as if holding a place rather than grabbing a person. That touch altered Claire's balance. She moved forward. The first external change arrived fast. A woman at the fringe, a former team member's partner, opened the ballroom doors and used the sudden draft like a microphone. "You took him," she said. "You took his job. You left him without a notice." Noise rose. Someone laughed badly. Someone else hissed. Marcus Ellery remained standing by the center display, his posture tight behind his bespoke suit. Claire threaded herself between servers and a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres until she was near the bar, where Marcus lingered with an empty flute. "Marcus," she said, and her voice set small and controlled in the room, "we need to talk." He did not look surprised. He turned his head with a slow economy that made people listen. He kept his hands clasped in front of him and did not raise them in defense. "After dinner," he said. His voice was the deep baritone that silenced side conversations. "Not after, Claire." She stepped closer when you announced the cuts. There were payroll notes that didn't match the list. "Someone may have been included by mistake. We have a responsibility to tell them." Her words were clipped. She let the accusation sit on the bar between them. Marcus's fingers tightened once. He rested his chin against a knuckle, the habit she knew too well, and hesitated. "Claire," he said, "I made a call based on projections. Mistakes happen." He paused long enough to choose those plain words. Claire felt the first emotional shift move under her skin, from guilt to anger. She straightened. "Mistakes that cost rent and benefits are not acceptable," she said. "We need to audit the list tonight." Her mouth did not tremble, but her bracelet rattled as she wound a finger through it. Marcus glanced toward the center ring where Daniel stood. "I'll authorize whatever you need," he said, "but not here." Claire, the words edged toward deflection. They landed on her as a choice she could not accept. She named him. "Marcus, you were in the meeting. You signed off. This is your call." The bar hummed with a new tension. An accusation burst into another corner of the room. A colleague grabbed Daniel by the lapel and said, "You could have warned them. You knew how layoffs were chosen." The man's voice was sharp and public. That confrontation shifted the night again. Daniel's shoulders squared. He glanced at Claire. "Who that?" he asked. "Kyle," the accuser said, "from Ops." He kept Jared's reports. Daniel answered with a quick, dry laugh. "Kyle, you named me." He put both hands up. "I don't make those calls. Marcus does." Marcus sits on that side of the room with the pen and the list. His voice was flat, protective. The second emotional shift moved through Claire. Anger softened into a focused resolve. She could feel her chest tighten, her jaw set. She could see the room divide on instinct, people anchoring themselves to places, to leaders, to explanations. Claire had been practicing mediation long enough to know that a live accusation needed a visible corrective, or it would become the story. Ava slipped up behind Claire and said without raising her voice, "Claire, I found something." A folded notice slid under a file. "I kept it." She tapped her notepad, then folded paper from her palm into Claire's line of sight and stepped away. Claire opened the paper between her fingers. The name on the layoff notice matched someone the company had announced had been let go. The date at the bottom of the notice did not match the official release schedule. The document had a clerical stamp misaligned with the rest of the header. It was small and specific and enough to change how the night would read if it was true. Claire motioned for Ava to come closer. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Ava's voice was small and quick. Service corridor. Someone dropped it when they were bringing coat racks. I thought. Her eyes flicked to Daniel. I thought you should know. Daniel took the paper, scanned it with a practiced accountant's eye. He straightened, then said, "This means they may have cut someone by mistake. We need her to reopen the list now." His voice carried a practical urgency that made people listen. At the ballroom entrance, the fired employee's partner jabbed a finger in the direction of the executives. "You can't spin this," she said. "You can't hide it." Claire had to make a decision in full sight. She could either let Marcus manage the optics or force an immediate move that risked the party fracturing into chaos. Her training told her to choose transparency. Her guilt told her not to delay 1 minute. She, loudly enough to cut through the clinking glasses, "Marcus, if there's a clerical irregularity, we must call payroll now and check the list." Marcus's face altered. He did not flinch, but his jaw worked once. "Not in front of everyone," he said. "Not in front of them," Claire repeated. She let the sentence land. The ballroom had grown quiet enough that someone left of center cleared their throat. From the terrace, the city's skyline glittered. From the ballroom, champagne seemed to slow. Claire's choices shifted again internally. Resolve to procedural action moved into the fear of causing a spectacle that would fracture staff trust further. The accusation at the entrance escalated. The fired partner had found a small group of former colleagues waiting in the lobby. One held a printed list of names and dates. Another had tears and a folded jacket. They demanded an answer. "Tell us who made the mistake." Daniel stepped between the accuser and Marcus. He set both hands on the accuser's shoulders and said, calm down, we'll check it. Claire, do you have payroll on call?" Claire barked an order into her phone and then used the speaker. "Payroll, this is Claire Bennett. We have a possible clerical error in the layoff distribution. Run a cross-check on the final list for the last pay period and flag any mismatches." Now she pressed the phone closed and met Marcus's eyes. He watched her with an expression she could not read, like a man measuring the width of a crack in glass. "If there's a mistake, Claire, we will fix it publicly." Marcus's answer came soft. "Fixing it publicly admits the mistake. Fixing it privately protects the company." His stance made a moral line visible. Claire stepped forward. "The company is people. The company is the chairs with no one sitting in them. If we protect the company first, who protects those chairs?" Her pulse was loud. She had to keep her sentences tight. An external event sliced through. A payroll manager in the corridor answered Claire's speaker and said, "We see a mismatch. There's a name that was cut but still tied to active benefits. We can flag it, but we need confirmation." The voice over the phone sounded distant, clinical. Claire felt the night's rhythm lurch into a new tempo. The room needed an answer. The fired partner needed a name. The people left needed an acknowledgement. Claire gave another order, "Bring me the list." Now she snapped the phone shut. At the center circle, a small group began to rise, to move as one toward the bar and the entrance. Ava murmured, "People are looking to you." Claire, her eyes were direct. Claire moved to the empty chair and knelt. Across from the folded jacket someone had placed there as a sign. She placed both hands on the back of the chair and felt the lacquered wood cool under her palms. She did not let herself name the person aloud. She let the action show the memory of Jed Kim's empty space. A rapid exchange of voices burst between Marcus and two staff members at the bar. "Marcus, we will review the payroll list first thing," another voice said. "A first thing isn't soon enough." The argument gained pace. 3-4 short lines exchanged sharply like flint. Daniel pressed in beside Claire and said, quietly, "If someone's been cut by mistake and their benefits lapse tonight, it becomes a different kind of harm." His tone was clipped. "Parental, I have a daughter. I can't let that happen to someone else." He named his child the way people anchor a moral decision. Claire heard his voice and felt empathy, not with her guilt again. That knot slid into method. "Bring me a laptop," she said. Someone handed one across the bar. Claire opened it, called up the secure payroll portal, and found the flagged entry. The name matched the notice Ava had given her. The mismatch showed a payroll code that placed the employee in a terminated bucket, though their badge was listed as active. A hush fell that was not polite. It was watchful. Marcus walked to the terrace and stepped outside, his silhouette cut against the city. Claire moved to the doorway to follow. She wanted to watch his face when he had space to think. On the terrace he did not close the glass door. He turned his back to the city and faced Claire. "I did what I thought was right for the company," he said. "You don't have to make this an indictment of leadership." Claire, she met his eyes. "People went home yesterday because of that call. Someone may have gone home by mistake. That is not a corporate abstraction, Marcus. It's a person who will lose paychecks and benefits." She kept her voice even. "We have to own it, Marcus. Owning it will break the stock narrative tomorrow. It will break investor faith. Do you know what that will do?" Claire's hands found the terrace rail. She tightened her grip until her knuckles paled. The third emotional shift moved, resolve shifting into fear of consequences for the whole company, responsibility balanced against potential ruin. Marcus, what we do next will either be about protecting the bottom line or protecting people. Tell me which you intend." Her words were not rhetorical. He looked at her long enough to show wariness at being asked to justify himself. Then he answered with an exactness she noticed. "I'll authorize a full review now. I will accept whatever findings come from it. I will stand in the room when we tell people the truth." Claire's breath released into a short exhale. "Say it now," she said. Marcus swallowed. "We made choices. Some were necessary, some were painful. If we made an error, we will correct it." Downstairs, an external sound erupted. Someone had started to cry. It turned the tension into a human frequency. Claire felt the air in her chest shift to a steady ache. They stepped back inside together. At the ballroom entrance, a fired employee's partner demanded a name. Claire walked to the center and said, "We found a payroll mismatch. We are checking it. If we made a mistake, we will correct it and reach out personally." A cluster of voices rose in reply. "Will you reinstate them? Will you pay back wages?" Who signed off? Marcus moved to the center and addressed the room with his measured cadence. "We will investigate immediately and report back. We owe that to you." The words did not land like absolution. Kyle, the accuser, pushed forward and said, "We need more than that. We need names and dates. We need to know you re-accountable." Marcus and Claire faced one another in the middle of the room. They provided different forms of leadership that night. His measured corporate language, her procedural insistence. The crowd's attention snapped between them in short breaths. The climax settled into a single decision point. Marcus chose how to frame responsibility. He could say the cuts were an unavoidable strategy, or he could name personal accountability. He hesitated, and then he said, "I signed the final approval." The sentence landed with the weight of a pen. The room moved. Some people exhaled as if relieved. Others stiffened. Claire felt the heat of that admission against her wrists. Ava reached across the center ring and tucked a folded jacket over the empty chair's back more carefully than before. Daniel moved to stand beside the chair and offered a small, practical question to a colleague about housing assistance he could help organize. The party fractured into practical clusters, people making lists, people making calls, people offering blankets and names. Marcus stepped down from the small dais and walked to the empty chair. He lowered himself for a moment, as if to make his presence smaller, and then he placed his palm on the back of the chair. His fingers were steady and Claire watched them. The gesture carried responsibility without a speech. Outside on the terrace, the city's lights kept their steady blink. Inside, Claire collected the notepad Ava had left on the bar and wrote a single line. "Payroll audit completed at 1:05 a.m. Follow through. Back pay benefits reactivated. Personal outreach, an external event arrived again." The payroll manager came into the ballroom with a printed confirmation. We found the mismatch. Jared Kim's termination code was entered in error. Payroll will issue back pay and benefits will be reinstated pending contact." Her voice had a formality that had the power of a medical report. Relief and anger braided across the room. Someone shouted, "Thank you," and someone else shouted, "Why did it happen?" The questions moved like small stones across a pond. Daniel took a step forward and said loudly, "We need a process change so this doesn't happen again." Claire put it on the agenda. "Marcus, will you approve it?" Marcus looked at Claire as if asking permission to be held to his word. Claire nodded once. "Yes," she said. "We will review procedures and add a double-check step for payroll and termination codes. We will include staff representation in the review." Her voice did not wobble. The room began to thin. People moved toward exits in small groups. Ava kept a soft hand on Daniel's sleeve. Claire lit a single candle she had asked maintenance to bring earlier and set it gently on the empty chair's arm. In the final slow minutes, alliances formed. Claire and Ava compared notes. Daniel organized a small roster to call affected families. Marcus stayed near the terrace door and accepted brief, direct questions from 2 managers. Claire felt the night's emotions settle into a careful aftertaste, not closure, but a set of actions that could be measured and verified. She had moved from guilt into anger into a resolve that forced others to choose. Ava, quietly, "You did the right thing, Claire." Claire did not answer with a motto. She simply signed the notepad and closed it. The last external event arrived as someone knocked on the ballroom door, an early morning courier with a stack of benefit forms to hand, deliver. The concrete next step had come to the room. She stood, candle in hand, and walked to the terrace for a moment to breathe. Marcus watched from the threshold, the city behind him and the party tailing off below. "Thank you," he said, and the words were small and exact. Claire nodded. She held the candle so its light fell on the terrace floor. "We fixed one mistake tonight," she said. "We still have to fix the process." Marcus's jaw worked once. "I'll be there when you present it," he said. She let the sentence close and walked back into the ballroom. The final paragraph of the night was a concrete beat. She put the candle on the empty chair, set down her notepad on the small table beside it, and told Daniel in a low voice, "Call Jared tonight. Tell him we found him." His reply was a short, dry laugh. "I'll call him now," he said. Claire stepped back and watched Daniel pick up the phone. The phone's screen lit his face. He spoke a single sentence that made others hush. "Jared, it's Daniel. We were checking on you." Her decision to confront the peril mismatch had fractured the night into a clearer set of duties. She left the ballroom with the candle's flame steady in her hand and a list of actions that would bind them to consequences at first light. The party had ended, but the work had begun. Someone threw a folded layoff notice onto the stage and shouted Marcus's name, and the glass in Claire Bennett's hand jumped against her palm. Suspicion lit under her ribs the way a match flares. She could feel it steering her feet before she decided to move. The crowd froze. Marcus Ellery stopped mid-sentence, his baritone cutting off, a rim of gold light catching the edge of his jaw. Claire's first thought was the people she'd signed departure letters for that morning, and the faces she had not been able to explain. That suspicion, the belief that someone here had been targeted for reasons other than numbers, guided every step she took across the ballroom. The company holiday decor glinted around them. Strings of small bulbs, tall vases with white orchids, and stacked champagne towers by the catering table. Those objects were furniture to the night. They should have been neutral. Claire moved through them with a single focus. Keep the room from becoming something she couldn't control. She had been Hethera for 8 years. Tonight she had been trying to shepherd survivors, not inflame them. The folded paper on the stage made that impossible. On stage, a younger man from engineering stood with his jaw working. He'd walked up between tables and tossed the paper at Marcus. "Why did you pick her?" he demanded, voice high, the words ricocheting across polished wood. Claire saw Marcus's expression shift, the careful hold he kept on his posture cracking for a half-breath. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed answers until they fit the room. Now the training met a live thing that refused to be smoothed over. "Marcus, answer him." Daniel Vega standing before Claire in the crowd. Daniel's voice was flat. He wasn't shouting. Claire had heard Daniel say one name aloud in the previous chapter, steady enough to be heard over the champagne clinks. The memory of that night, Daniel naming who was gone, pressed behind her eyes. Daniel's mouth hardened. His fingers dug into the strap of his worn leather satchel. "Daniel." "Claire," but the room had already leaned toward the stage. Someone called out a severance amount. A woman shook a napkin and hurled it at a waiter. Marcus moved his hands slowly to show calm. Claire read the motion and stepped forward to intercept him before his practiced cadence could turn into another corporate explanation. She took him by the elbow and steered him toward the narrow service corridor behind the stage. The lights in the corridor were fluorescent, a hard, practical white after the warm gold, teal of the ballroom. The smell of spilled wine clung to the carpet. Claire kept her voice low. "Marcus, tell me exactly what the board told you this afternoon." Marcus closed his eyes for half a count, then opened them. His voice lowered to match hers. "Claire, this is not the time." He kept his shoulders square. He still wore the midnight navy suit Claire had seen on him at board meetings, tailored, untouched by the night's mess. "It is the time, Claire. People are asking questions they deserve answers to." "I need the truth, Marcus." Her fingers tightened on his sleeve. The suspicion she had felt at the stage settled into a sharper edge. The feeling that the layoffs had not been blunt but surgical. He inhaled and then, against habit, he rubbed the faint scar on his left jawline as if to find purchase there. "Board pressure, projections. We had to cut payroll to hit a runway target," he said slowly. He spoke in clauses that were practiced. "I signed the plan. I told them the human cost." They wanted results. Claire listened to the sentences as if testing each for weight. "Which roles, Marcus? Did anyone get marked for reasons other than cost?" she asked. She watched his face for the tiny betrayals of lying. A pause too long, a blink that timed oddly. He looked away and allowed the corridor's light to etch the planes of his face. There were discretionary reductions. He said we had to choose. The phrasing was careful. Claire felt a second emotion arrive behind the suspicion. Anger. It began as a tightness in her jaw and traveled down into her hands until she had to unclench them. They were interrupted by Ava Morales appearing at the corridor's mouth with a small phone. Screen glow in her hand and a look that combined urgency and a refusal to let the night be smoothed over. Ava's hair lay sleek against her shoulders. Her silk scarf brushed her collarbone. She stepped close to Claire and slid a folded stack of emails under Claire's fingers. "Look at this, Ava." Her voice was quick and clear. People were flagged with discretionary notes. "See the column, Claire." Claire unfolded the printed emails. Subject lines, timestamps, and a redacted spreadsheet with a column title that said discretionary review and short notes beside certain names. One note read, "Non-aligned team, consider reduction." Another read, "Cost savings via reorganization. Prioritize operations in region." The handwriting, like comments in the margin, suggested human selection, not algorithmic pruning. Ava's hand hovered over the paper. This wasn't just cost avoidance. Some names were recommended because of department politics. Her gaze flicked to Marcus. "We need to address that." Marcus's jaw tightened. He ran a thumb over his gold tie clip. "Those are recommendations," he said. "Final decisions considered multiple inputs. Recommendations with a prioritized list look like a plan, Ava. That list includes people who led small complaints last quarter." Claire's chest pressed with the third shift in her emotions. From suspicion to anger to a cold determination. She felt responsible for the faces she'd been unable to justify. She flattened the printouts on a service counter and stepped back onto the ballroom floor with Ava at her side. Outside, the party had begun to tilt. A former employee who'd slipped back into the room stood on the dance floor, a printed severance email raised like a placard. "Tell us who ordered this," he shouted. He held the paper high. The crowd moved closer. Daniel hovered near a table, his hands in his pockets, eyes narrowed. He watched Marcus with a careful stillness. Marcus cleared his throat and lifted both palms. "I will answer questions after the event," he said, voice measured. "We are not doing this now." The attempt to take control failed. People shouted faster. The ex-employee called for names and explanations, and the tension climbed. Someone threw a drink. A server stepped between two men who were moving toward each other. Claire felt the room's energy shift into risk. She moved to the ballroom entrance and met Ava's steady gaze. Ava whispered, "We need evidence on the floor." "If this is selective, people deserve to know now." Claire turned toward the stage and saw Daniel move. He walked with a collected, precise anger. Daniel approached Marcus and spoke in a low voice that carried past the cluster nearest them. "Marcus, stop speaking in circles. Say who authorized discretionary targets." His words were short, direct and edged. Marcus answered in clipped sentences, "I signed the plan." The board insisted on a runway. "We executed." Daniel's laugh was sharp. "You signed it, Marcus. You present it. So stop pretending you are a bystander." He sounded exhausted and furious at once. Claire noticed how his hands rubbed together, a small, telling motion he made when anger had turned personal. He had the look of a man trading care for his child against the knowledge of what that night demanded. The crowd closed in as the ex-employee who had returned started reading names from his printed document. Some names matched people who had stood at nearby tables. Murmurs spread like a physical movement. Claire kept stepping into the room's edges to prevent shoving. She saw colleagues turn to one another, trying to place who had been let go. Ava moved with a purpose that hid fear. She had already sent a photo of the spreadsheet to a personal account. Her phone buzzed in her palm. "Claire," she said, eyes quick. Someone posted a screenshot to an internal thread. "It's getting traction." She lifted her chin toward the balcony where a cluster of junior staffers had gathered. Claire nodded. Every new evidence point was a fuel for a different kind of truth. She had a duty to protect survivors and to give names a context. But she also had a duty to the people who had been selected. She didn't want to be the person who then smoothed over injustice for the sake of the company's image. The incident on the dance floor escalated when the ex-employee pushed through a server's line and read a full severance email aloud. "It was unavoidable," he said. Pointing at Marcus. "You lied to us." Marcus's face moved for the first time into a raw place. His shoulders hunched, and the deliberate pauses in his speech disappeared. He took a step off the stage and toward the crowd. Claire felt the room lean like a physical pressure against her ribs. She moved to intercept him. "Marcus," she said louder than she meant. "Come with me to the center. Explain it clearly. Do it now." Her voice cut through the noise because it was direct and named what needed to be done. He looked at her as if weighing her request for public accountability against every private board meeting he'd had. Then he nodded. Together they moved to the center of the ballroom. On the way, 3 people caught Claire's attention. Daniel, whose jaw had set. Ava, holding the spreadsheet printout against her palm like a shield. And a woman who had been laid off last month, seated with a folded jacket on the chair beside her. Claire recognized the folded jacket from the first chapter's memory and felt the continuity press on her choices. At the center, Marcus stopped and faced them. The room tightened around his words. He took a breath that should have been the kind practiced for damage control, but something in the night's pressure made him break the script. "We made choices, Marcus. I made choices." His voice was raw in a way Claire had not heard before. He spoke in short sentences now. "The board gave us projections that required cutting payroll. I approved a list. I approved names." Ava stepped forward, paper in hand. "Marcus, these notes show who was targeted for non-performance reasons," she said. "You and the board recommended cuts to people who raised issues last quarter." Marcus's face went still. He let a breath out that showed the shape of a decision made under pressure. There were recommendations and a prioritization. "I took responsibility. The company had to survive." The words landed like a physical thing. Someone shouted. A woman threw a glass. It shattered near the piano, glittering on the floor. Daniel's face moved from anger to something colder, betrayal turning into a hard relief that truth was out. He stepped back, hands opening and closing. Claire found herself doing 2 opposing things at once, trying to stop a physical escalation and cataloging consequences. She, in a voice that tried to stay even, "Marcus, we will need to document every step. We will need the original spreadsheet, emails, and board notes. This cannot be swept away." Her mouth made a sentence that committed the company to process even while the crowd demanded accountability. Marcus's shoulders dropped as if a weight had shifted into his chest. He glanced at Ava, then at Claire, then at Daniel. The pause that followed was full of people deciding what to do next. He spoke with a clarity that felt like confession. "I thought I could protect the company by taking the hit myself," he said. "I thought the board would accept moral cost if it meant survival. I misread them. I misread what people could forgive." His voice broke once. That admission changed the room. It shifted the argument from did the company need cuts to who chose who. People around them changed how they touched their glasses, how their eyes darted to seats that remained empty. A man who had been laid off earlier that afternoon moved to the front, his expression small and open. "You asked to trust you," he said. "We expected honesty." Marcus's reply was short. "I own it." The line hung there, not ending anything but making responsibility visible. Someone began to clap sarcastically. Another person started a chant of names from the severance list. Claire felt her energy ebby into exhaustion and an odd steadiness. She had demanded answers, and answers had arrived, messy and human. Now the night would need to be managed to prevent harm. Daniel stepped toward the exit. He didn't run. He moved with a withdrawn stare and the slow set of someone deciding to close a door. Claire watched him go and felt a new hardness settle over her decisions. She had to protect those who remained and document what had happened so the fired colleagues had a record. The tension in her shifted from anger to duty. She found Daniel later in the empty courtroom. The room smelled faintly of perfume and wet wool. He had removed his blazer and draped it over a chair. The light was practical and unforgiving. He looked at Claire and spoke without preamble. "You knew something was off," he said. "You mean to keep my head down?" Claire's reply was a short sentence. "I had pieces. Ava found the emails. I didn't have proof before tonight." She lowered her voice. "I thought I could fix this without tearing the room apart." Daniel's laugh was soft and bitter. "Fix it how?" "By telling people to be patient while their coworkers got notices." He rubbed his thumb against his index finger, that small gesture that had betrayed him earlier when he was anxious. "My kid asked why his teacher's dad didn't come back. Claire, I told him it's business. He doesn't understand that word." They traded short lines, 3 each, rapid enough that each small sentence hit like a stone packing down a path. "Daniel, I am sorry." "Claire." "Sorry doesn't bring peril back." Daniel answered, "No, it doesn't." Claire touched the folded jacket on the chair nearby, remembering the empty seat from earlier. "But they need names and context. They need a record outside." Through the hallway's glass, Claire could hear another murmur swell as someone had posted the spreadsheet to an external chat. The noise promised further consequences. When she returned to the ballroom, she found Ava near the entrance watching Marcus with an expression that mixed calculation and grief. Ava's hand closed over her planner. She had tucked the original leaked spreadsheet within its pages earlier, then had pulled it back out to show Claire. Now she slipped it in again. Ava's last look at Marcus was deliberate. She did not lower her eyes. She simply said, "This doesn't end tonight." Marcus nodded once, like a man acknowledging a sentence passed. Claire watched him breathe through the night as if counting something down. The next step would be board meetings, internal investigations, statements, and likely resignations. She felt the final shift in her emotions. Suspicion had moved into anger, anger into duty, and duty into a tired resolve to document and protect. Claire realized she had stepped from a role of mediator into one of witness. That change would reshape her responsibilities. As the party broke into smaller groups and the initial heat cooled into a tense exhaustion, Claire found herself cataloging names aloud into her phone, making notes for the report she would file. She spoke in short sentences, listing dates and emails. Her voice was clinical now. Documentation had replaced the raw edge of accusation. At the periphery, Ava closed her planner with a quiet motion. The planner made a clean sound as the elastic snapped over its cover. She slipped it into her bag and moved toward the service elevator with a deliberate stride. Claire saw her silhouette past the doorway and looked back to the center where Marcus stood with his hands unclasped. Marcus met Claire's eyes briefly and offered the smallest of nods. It was not comfort. It was acknowledgement of what had been said and what had to follow. Claire turned away to go to the coatroom where Daniel had left a note pinned to a hanger. He had gone home early. The note read one line: "Tell them the truth." "Daniel." Claire folded the note into her wallet and tucked it into the pocket, where she kept business cards and emergency contact numbers. She felt the weight of that paper as a concrete thing she could hold rather than an abstract guilt. Ava stepped into the elevator as the door's side closed. Claire watched until the stainless steel panels hid her movement. Then Claire walked back through the ballroom, the cleaned shards of champagne glass glittering under the lights like small mirrors. She moved with purpose toward the service entrance, toward human resources and the file cabinets that would now hold the record of this night. The night had given them answers and broken the party into a list of tasks. Preserve evidence, notify counsel, hold employee briefings, and prepare for the board meeting that would now be different. At the service door, Claire paused, looked back once at the ballroom, and heard a voice from the center call Marcus's name again. She turned her head, then took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The cool corridor air closed behind her. Ava's planner was already a fact inside the bag. The paper was secure. Claire walked into the bright, practical fluorescence with a single, concrete plan to write down everything she had seen and heard before the night could be rewritten. Outside, the city's skyline showed through the ballroom windows, a line of office lights and a few moving cars. That scenery would be how people described where they'd been when they learned the truth. Claire took out her phone and began dictating the first point of her report. The folded notice thrown on stage, the printed severance read aloud, the spreadsheet with discretionary notes, Marcus's admission that he had signed names, and the moment Daniel walked out. It was a list of events, a ledger of what had happened. She spoke in short, precise sentences, each one anchoring the night's facts to paper. By the time she finished, the night's immediate fight had been resolved into actions. Evidence preserved, statements requested, protections for remaining staff laid out, and a note that Ava would be included in any investigatory committee. None of it returned the people who had been let go, but it made the choices accountable. Claire slid her phone back into her blazer and felt the fatigue press at the back of her throat. She would draft the report, convene council, and notify the board. She would also make sure the survivors had an open forum. The steps were practical. They were how she would translate anger into something that could be used. In the elevator down to the service level, Ava's planner lay under 2 folded linen napkins that still smelled faintly of champagne. Ava lifted the planner and tapped the spreadsheet edge with a finger, then closed it as if sealing a letter. The planner went back into her bag. She looked at the elevator doors as they closed and thought, not in general terms but in concrete actions. Photocopy the file, forward the email trail to council, and lock the original in a safe. Claire stepped off the elevator at the loading level and found Daniel waiting by the curb under a small awning, his breath making small clouds in the cool night. He had a hand on his phone. He looked up as she approached and handed her a small folded note for the record. He said. She took it. The note read 3 words. "A document everything," she nodded. Claire folded the note and put it into the same pocket as Daniel's earlier Hanja note. The concrete pile of papers and small notes felt less like guilt and more like a ledger of responsibility. Behind them, the party winded down. Servers collected glasses. Someone turned on a radio with quiet music to fill the space where shouting had been. Claire watched Marcus step away from the center to a small group of board members who had come down from the balcony. They spoke in low voices. Claire could not hear their words, but their faces were taut with the same rawness that had shown on Marcus's jaw. She stepped back into the service corridor and closed the heavy door behind her. On the other side, Ava's planner rested in her bag like a closed file. Claire felt the night's arc settle into a list of actions she would take tomorrow. She had moved through suspicion, anger, duty, and a tired resolve to preserve the truth. The room would not forget the names called tonight, and the documents would not disappear. That certainty was small and precise, and, for now, enough. The night guard's radio cut in. "There's blood in Dock B. Get down here now." Daniel Vega dropped his coat on the valet cart and ran toward the garage doors, keys jangling in one hand. Guilt sat heavy against his ribs the way a physical weight does, because he'd said a name aloud at the party only hours before and the room had listened. He had not imagined a scraped keycard and a dark smear would turn that name into a summons. He ducked under the hanging plastic strips and found the utility cart overturned, boxes spilled, and a single employee keycard lying face down on the concrete with a smear he couldn't ignore. Daniel crouched and picked it up with a thumb and a napkin from his pocket. The smell rose, copper and cleaning solvent. The guard, leaning on his flashlight, watched without speaking. "You called me, Marcus." Someone barked from the corridor above. Ava Morels's voice, clipped and urgent, came down the service stairwell while her shoes scuffed concrete. Daniel's shoulders tightened. He had not slept more than a few hours in 2 days. He kept thinking of the name he'd said during the toast, and the flat silence that followed. Now the tower of responsibility pulled him into action. Claire Bennett arrived next, blazer cinched, planner clutched like a shield. She moved past the guard, her eyes on the keycard in Daniel's hand, who found it. She asked, and her voice held the practiced command she used with managers and staff. She the word who, as if it were a lever, people moved. "Night guard. Dock B." Cart overturned. Daniel. He placed the card on an outstretched paper towel and tapped the smear with his fingertip, testing whether it was ink, oil, or blood. The gesture was small and mechanical, but his fingers trembled. Guilt, an immediate, sharp knot, pushed him to check, to be the one who did something more than stand and watch. Ava crouched beside him, scarf falling away from her collar. "Daniel, look," she pointed to a shoe print on the wet concrete. A heel scuff with a folded piece of paper pinned under it. Daniel peeled the paper free. It was a folded layoff notice, the same printed form people had seen thrown earlier. He thumbed the corner. Someone had pressed it to the shoe like a signature. The paper's edges left a faint ring of damp on his palm. Claire scanned the loading bay, eyes narrowing, locked down the stairs. "No one goes up to the ballroom," she ordered. The tone in her voice changed from manager to protector. Marcus Ellery stepped into the loading bay with his coat over one arm and a crowd falling behind him like a hesitant tide. He took in the cart and the paper in silence. "Marcus," a woman hissed from the stairwell, "you promised transparency." The accusation hit him directly. His jaw tightened. The scar on his left jawline caught the light. I don't know who did this," and his voice was measured, the warm baritone that usually calmed meetings. Daniel watched Marcus watch them. Daniel's suspicion moved from the corner of his brain to his hands. He checked his watch, then forced himself to look at Marcus's face for clues. They moved as a team, Claire directing, Ava cataloging, Daniel doing what he could with his practical hands. The security control room yielded more questions than answers. Daniel and the night officer keyed through camera feeds and found a looped file on the ballroom camera. The back hallway feed stopped 3 minutes before the incident. His pulse sped. Suspicion rose like a standing knot in his throat. Someone had tampered. Why would they loop a feed? The guard asked. Daniel answered without waiting, to hide movement, to erase who came and went. The words landed cold. Claire's brow creased. Marcus stepped closer to the monitors and watched his own company replay without the missing minutes. He rubbed his temples and kept his shoulders square. Ava found a trail next, a faint scent of perfume leading from the supply door that hadn't been opened all night. She moved at a faster pace than her words. "There's a photo on the floor," she said. Daniel followed, and the photograph was face down beside a stack of plastic cups. When he flipped it, it was Ellie Park's laugh caught mid-sentence at the summer kickoff. Someone had torn the corner where a phone number had been scrawled. "Ellie's here until 11 for cleanup." The guard said. "He didn't come out." The statement snapped the room into urgent movement. Daniel heard his own name more than once as he relayed calls and found his voice rough when he spoke to dispatch. He dialed Ellie's number with 2 fingers, then with his thumb locked the phone and put it away when there was no answer. Claire barked a quick schedule for searches and medics. "Marcus, downstairs now." Daniel, Ava, checked the supply closet and the basement corridors. "Lock exterior doors." Her instructions were crisp, every syllable pushing them to move. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Distancing into practice, letting duty push down the guilt that had pushed him to the dock. They descended the service stairwell 2 by 2. The hallway smelled of industrial cleaner and the faint residue of someone's aftershave. The lights hummed. Daniel kept his hand on the rail because his palms were slick. He had to keep steady for the sake of his child waiting at home, the rent that arrived like a monthly weather front. Guilt had been his first reaction, suspicion his second. Now fear edged into the shapes of his movements. In the narrow hallway, coworkers clustered around Marcus and started to shout, "Where's Ely?" Someone demanded, "How could you?" Another voice cut in. Marcus didn't step back. Daniel moved between the crowd and Marcus without announcing himself. He placed his hand on Marcus's arm and said, "Marcus, let them talk." "We'll get answers," he heard his own voice chip at the edges. Claire pressed against the wall and hailed for silence. "Name, who said what?" "One person speaks at a time," she said. There were 3 rapid back and forth lines as coworkers traded accusations. "He signed the memo!" "He promised there'd be severance. We saw the numbers drop all week." The exchange felt like sparks. Daniel kept his gaze on the hallway floor, watching feet shuffle and the line of the carpet where someone had scuffed a heel. He felt a small, practical urgency. Find Ellie, call medics, secure the scene. He moved with Ava toward the door to the basement where the janitor stored supplies. Ava eased the supply closet open and found a folded note hidden behind cleaning chemicals. She passed it to Daniel. The handwriting was tight and slanted. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect," and it named a manager Daniel recognized from a meeting earlier in the day. Daniel read the line once, then again, because it rewired the way he understood the photograph and the perfume trail. The suspicion that had been a shadow now had a face. They pushed on. The janitor's key turned in the lock to a small storage room that smelled of bleach and oil. Daniel flipped on a bare bulb and saw a pair of legs splayed and a jacket folded over a chest. Ellie Park lay on the concrete, breathing shallow, a shallow wound on his temple and a folded layoff notice pinned to his shirt. Daniel's fingers found Ellie's wrist and felt a pulse quick and weak. Call 911, Daniel the guard, then louder to the corridor, call an ambulance now. He started compressions when the guard hesitated. Claire moved into the doorway and crouched beside him. Marcus hovered outside, hand in his pocket, eyes blank with something that could be called fear. Hold his head steady. Claire. Daniel heard the command and obeyed. The medics arrived in a flurry of light and movement. Someone shouted names as they loaded Ellie onto a stretcher. Ava squeezed Daniel's shoulder without looking at him. You did right by him, she said. He swallowed and did not answer because talking felt like stepping into another arena he wasn't ready for. In the aftermath, the hallway filled with questions again. People who had seen Ellie last, where he'd gone, and why the camera feeds had gaps. Marcus retreated to the stairwell and leaned with his head against the cool concrete, the gold tie clip catching a faint light. He didn't speak until Claire approached him and said, "We have to be transparent, Marcus. Tell me everything you know about the footage." He hesitated, eyes closing for a moment. "I ordered a temporary hold on some accesses last week," Marcus slowly. "But not surveillance." "Not like this," his voice faltered on the last two words. Daniel watched Marcus's fingers drum the seam of his coat. The small dimple appeared when he tightened his mouth. That physical pause made Daniel second. Guess what he had assumed earlier? Suspicion bent toward doubt. Claire moved with deliberate steps to the control room. "We need to log every entry. No one leaves until we know who's missing and why the feed was looped," she said. Her planner lay open and she flipped to a page where the roster had names circled in ink. Daniel saw that tally and the tiny note in Claire's handwriting, hold. He felt the guilt change, thinning into a determination to follow the facts, rather than let rumor steer him. They conducted interviews in the staff kitchen under buzzing fluorescent lights. Daniel direct questions. "When did you see Ellie last? Did you take his badge?" The replies came in clipped, honest sentences. People named times and places. Someone mentioned a terse message on a breakroom bulletin board he had missed. The exchange produced small revelations. Ellie had argued with a manager over severance. Ellie had stayed late to finish a reconciliation. Every 3 or 4 paragraphs into the night's motion, new events forced them to shift. A janitor ran in with a bloodied mop. A coworker produced a voicemail Ellie had left earlier in the evening where he sounded tired and said, "I'll sort it in the morning." Security found a shoeprint that led back toward the terrace. Each new discovery turned suspicion into a sharper instrument. At one point, a rapid exchange broke out near the elevators. "Marcus, did you approve the layoff list?" "Claire, you signed the severance policy last quarter." "Daniel, you were at the accounting review. What did you see?" The back and forth lasted 5 lines. Accusation, defense, counter, plea, command. Daniel spoke plainly, using names to anchor people. "Marcus, tell Claire the access changes now." "Ava, pull Ellie's badge log." "Claire, notify her counsel." The short commands kept the conversation moving toward facts. They found a voicemail on Ellie's phone that altered the night's map. He had called a number not in his contacts and left a terse message. "I can't do this alone." That line hit like a splinter. Daniel pressed his thumb over the play button until the message cycled twice. The tone in Ellie's voice, thin, breathless, like someone who had been arguing and then cut off, shifted the group's mood from investigative to protective. Paramedics drove Ellie to the hospital. People clustered on the loading dock porch while early light blood through the windows. Questions proliferated. The cameras were logged for tampering. The security officer said footage had been clipped at 1 minute and 15 seconds, replaced with a loop of earlier frames. Marcus stood apart and finally met Claire face to face. "Claire, can we talk in private?" he asked. The request carried the weight of something guarded. She nodded and led him up toward his office. Daniel watched them go, feeling a new tension like a cord tightening. The sequence of emotional shifts, guilt to suspicion to fear to a brittle, forced composure. had moved him from immediate action to a broader dread that the incident was not random. When everyone dispersed, Marcus closed his office door and sat behind his desk like a man waiting to be measured. He slid a thin envelope across the polished wood to Claire. She lifted it, read the first line, and stopped. The content was not a confession but a defensive plan. Tamper investigations would be handled internally, statements limited. A proposal to release, a carefully worded memo. Claire's hand trembled once as she read. Then she folded the paper and met Marcus's eyes. "Marcus, you know we can't hide this." "Claire." Her voice was low but firm. "There was no plea in it. We have a man in the hospital and footage that was tampered with. We owe him transparency." Marcus's jaw worked. "I can limit the narrative," he said. "I can contain the damage." He did not say how. Claire's lips thinned. Daniel, standing outside the frosted glass, could hear the muffled syllables, but not the full exchange. Claire stood and walked to the window, the city visible in thin bands of gold and teal. "We will call council and the board. We will tell the families what we know. No more hiding." Marcus's hands curled into the edge of the desk. He looked at her as if weighing a bridge. "If we do that, the company will suffer more immediate fallout," he said. "The board will panic. My family." He stopped. Claire looked at him without blinking. "If we don't, Ellie could die because we tried to control what comes next. If we don't, people will believe the worst." "Marcus. Transparency protects the company and the people in it." The words landed like a clear instruction. Daniel thought of his own son, of the ways people protect the ones they love by telling the hard truths. Marcus exhaled and slid his hand into his coat. He did not sign anything then. Instead, he said, "I'll tell the board in the morning. I'll open the cameras to council. But I need you to promise discretion until then." Claire's reply was a single word, measured. "No." She crossed the room and placed the envelope back toward him. "We tell the families now and the board immediately. That's not discretion. That's duty. If you can't stand by that, tell me who can." Her voice had the steadiness of someone who had been carrying other people's grief all day. Marcus's face hardened, but his eyes flitted to the small scar at his jaw before he turned his head away. "I'll set the board for 7 a.m. I'll call council." The choice was a concession and not a surrender. As Claire left his office, she held the thin file to her chest like a small shield. Outside, Daniel lit a cigarette. He had promised himself he would quit, and only inhaled once. The smoke went into the early air and he tasted the metal tang of adrenaline. He had moved tonight from guilt to suspicion to action, and now the movement had turned again toward a new question. Who had the motive and access to tamper with cameras and pin a layoff notice to a living colleague? That question would not leave him. The chapter closed on the sound of Marcus clicking his office light off and the echo of Claire's heels down the hall. Someone called Ellie's name once more, a soft repetition that did not solve anything. The parking lot lights glowed amber as the staff dispersed. Daniel tucked the torn photograph into his wallet and walked out through the plastic strips, the weight of the night's choices heavy but concrete. He thought of the ambulance lights and the stretcher and vowed to follow the data where it led. Upstairs, the ballroom's rim lights still shimmered on empty chairs. Downstairs, a folded layoff notice lay damp on concrete. The concrete facts remained, and Daniel stepped into morning with a cold, practical resolve to find what had been hidden. Ava Morales slammed a printed spreadsheet onto Marcus Ellery's desk before Claire Bennett could reach the corner office. Claire heard the report of paper against wood down the corridor and walked faster. Suspicion sat under her ribs the way a stone presses at the base of the throat. It was suspicion that made her shoulder set and her voice steady when she pushed the door open. She saw Ava standing over the desk, eyes bright, shoulders forward, the spreadsheet spread like an accusation. Marcus Ellery lifted his chin, slow and controlled, as if the movement could slow what had already snapped. "Marcus, Ava, explain this." Claire heard the single word, sharp and small, and she stepped between them. Claire moved with the short, efficient steps of someone who had spent years between staff and leadership. She had been HR director long enough to read paper, faces, and timing the way others read the weather. She knew what each element meant in an office fight. Who would flinch, who would deflect, who would hold. She also knew the central problem clearly. Employees had been targeted, and someone had a list. That list was on Marcus's desk now. Ava, Claire, and the name in her mouth was a steadier thing than the suspicion. Let us see the file. She reached for the paper. Ava did not hand it over. She tapped a column with one finger and looked at Marcus. These are the layoffs we didn't know were going to happen. These are the emails. This account number routes money away from the company. Marcus, this isn't cost cutting, it's theft. Her voice did not waver. Marcus kept his shoulders square. He set both hands on the desk. Claire, Marcus, these were painful choices for survival. The company faced a failed acquisition and we had to. Survival doesn't explain an offshore rotting number. Ava interrupted. It doesn't explain why names are marked in red with a note that says priority. Claire watched Marcus's jaw work. She felt the suspicion morph into a second impulse. Protectiveness of the people whose names might be listed here. That protectiveness had been the reason she chose to take this job. She pushed the paper closer to her, eyes scanning rows while Marcus arranged his words. Marcus spoke again, measured. We tried to be strategic. We tried to minimize fallout. Any appearance of wrongdoing is. An appearance isn't a list. Bank details. Ava, an appearance doesn't have a time stamp and a transfer number. She pulled a phone from her pocket and set it on the desk, screen up. Claire's eyes caught the timestamp. It matched payroll windows. She traced a code with her finger, lips pressed. The first external event after the door was opened arrived when the elevator dinged and Daniel Vega stepped into the corridor, coat flung over an arm, breath still warm from running. He had been at the ballroom earlier. He had said a name aloud in front of the company, and he'd run toward the garages when the guard had radioed about blood. Claire had remembered that night and the way Daniel's guilt had given him a raw urgency. Now he stood in the doorway, the worn strap of a satchel cutting across his chest. What's happening? Daniel, voice low. Ava found routing. Claire, names, account numbers. She handed him the spreadsheet. Daniel skimmed the rows. His face emptied for a second, then closed like someone setting a heavy lid in place. My people are on here, he said. Ava, Claire, Marcus, who made this choice? He moved closer to the desk and planted both hands on the surface. The physical weight of his stance changed the room's rhythm. His protectiveness pushed past the earlier suspicion in Claire's chest and turned into anger. Marcus, answer him. Ava. Marcus did not raise his voice. He rubbed his thumb and forefinger together in the pause before speaking, that small, human motion Claire had watched before and filed away because it usually meant he was choosing his words. He looked at Daniel. Daniel, you know I didn't want to. You made the call. Daniel interrupted. You signed it. He Marcus's name like a closing hinge. Claire felt a pull between two obligations. To the facts on the table and to the stability of a company that, if it collapsed, would hurt more people. Doubt flashed through her. Was there a legitimate corporate paper trail for this routing? Had she missed a memo? She folded that doubt away and leaned forward. Her role required precise verification. Suspicion alone did not make a case. Claire, Marcus, we rotted through a subsidiary to protect assets while negotiations concluded. It was legal counsel's plan. Where's the counsel email? Ava. Claire scanned the spreadsheet again and found margin notes in handwriting that matched no signature she recognized. She spotted a coded annotation. 3 letters circled and an account number beneath. The account number repeated in a document header. The second external event came when Claire's finger landed on the same sequence, and she murmured the code aloud. This isn't counsel formatting, she said. These are ledger codes used in private transfers. Who authorized that account? Marcus's eyes flicked to the window and back. He placed his palms flat on the desk. We were trying to prevent layoffs from being public until we had the acquisition finalized, he said. It was the only path. Only path for whom? Daniel shot back. For the people being let go, for the stock, for you. Claire interrupted. Names matter. Tell me who ordered the list. Her voice was clipped. She kept the word suspicion in the half-sentence inside her. It guided her questions. Marcus's reply was a practice in control. The comp team, the legal team, executive leadership. He did not name names. His cadence had always been slow, his baritone steady. He was presenting corporate procedure. Ava slid a photo across the desk without looking away from Marcus. We found this in the security feed, she said, time-stamped. An admin at finance accessed the spreadsheet at midnight. Look at the file name. She tapped the phone screen. Claire read the photo's metadata with the quickness of someone used to scanning documents for irregularities. The file name carried an internal abbreviation and an account suffix. A second external event landed. Ava touched her screen and a message thread popped up, saved by a colleague who had feared reprisal. The thread showed a directive and a calendar note where a transfer had been scheduled. Daniel exhaled, a short sound. "I pulled a layoff notice earlier," he said. He reached into his satchel and unfolded the paper he had rescued from the stage. "I saved this. I didn't know why it was folded and thrown until now." Marcus, this has timestamps that match the security photo. Explain that Marcus's expression tightened. He kept his voice regulated. There were discussions at executive level around timing. We had to prepare in case the acquisition failed. It looks awful now, I know that. But this was contingency planning. The word contingency as if it might soften the hard angles of the spreadsheet. Claire watched the way Daniel's mouth set, and the way Ava's shoulders trembled once before she controlled them. The suspicion had shifted into a new emotion in Claire. A sharpened need for clarity. She needed a factual thread she could follow to present to the board and to the staff. Her hands steady went to the laptop on a side table. She typed with a precision that left no space for rhetorical flourish. "Show me the audit trail, Claire. Show me the user logs for that file and the account history for that number. Marcus, you gave orders through whom?" Her sentences were short, each one an axe blow. Marcus opened his mouth. He hesitated. That hesitation was a visible fissure. "Claire, there are non-disclosure considerations. I can get counsel involved." Ava cut him off. "You can call counsel after we verify whether funds left this account and to whose benefit," she said. "We have a right to know if layoffs were used to hide an embezzlement." Her words landed and set the room on a new edge. The third external event arrived when Claire clicked open a spreadsheet history on the laptop and found an unusual entry. A shared drive transfer marked with an internal alias that correlated to the account suffix. She read the alias aloud. "This ties to a single executive email that was forwarded 3 times at 11:59 p.m. The night before payroll." She set the laptop down. Daniel's voice was low and tight. "That's the same night I heard the night guard's radio call. I ran for the garage because something happened in Dock B. I don't know if it's related, but I said a name at the party earlier, and now this." Claire remembered Daniel saying a name aloud at the party. She remembered the folded layoff notice thrown onto the stage in Chapter 2 and the guard's call from Chapter 3. Those earlier moments were small, precise facts in her memory. She threaded them into the present. The record of a name at the party, the physical layoff notice, and now duplicated timestamps made a pattern she could not ignore. Marcus's hands rose an inch. "I authorized preparatory lists," he said. "I did not authorize wrongdoing. If accounts show transfers, they repost. Approval and within council oversight." Ava, who had been quiet until now, moved to Claire's side and set her phone down. "Claire, look at the saved text thread." She tapped the screen to enlarge 2 messages. One was a shortened instruction: "Execute before close." The second message contained a partial account number and a 3-letter code. Claire read both. The evidence shifted the room's temperature again. Suspicion moved into alarm. That was the second major emotion shift, from suspicion to anger to alarmed clarity. She felt her pulse at her throat and measured each syllable. "Marcus, if transfers went to that number, Claire, we have to secure records and notify council and audit. Now, not tomorrow." Now Marcus's voice was low. "I will cooperate, Claire." He looked past her to the high windows and the city lights and then back. "But I ask you to consider the company's survival. Public exposure could ruin people beyond the list." Daniel laughed once. "Without humor, you speak of people's lives, Marcus, while a list of names sits on your desk." The argument that followed tightened into rapid exchange. Marcus defended procedure. Ava pushed lines of evidence. Daniel demanded names. Claire cut through with questions that required immediate answers. Their voices overlapped, 3 to 6 quick lines of back and forth where each reply shortened became clipped. The dialogue revealed more than any single statement. Marcus avoided naming the subsidiary's controller. Ava insisted the routing matched an account known to insiders. Daniel demanded to know who profited. An external event shifted the scene. A security officer knocked and said a name over the intercom, then handed Claire a timestamped security snapshot Ava had not seen. The snap showed an admin badge accessing the file at 11:57 p.m. And in the corner of the image a reflection in glass caught a second figure's profile, barely visible but there. The photo introduced a new clue and a sharp mini cliffhanger. Claire felt the room narrow. She had to decide whether to escalate to public exposure or to force an internal accounting. Her role required measured steps. Her instinct for protecting staff required swift ones. She thought of the employees who had left the ballroom with their boxes earlier that night. She thought of the empty chair Daniel had named in Chapter 1 and the folded layoff notice flung at the podium in Chapter 2. Those were facts she could cite. Marcus. Claire, voice flat. If someone on your team signed off on wiring that money, you must tell us who. If you won't, I will send this to legal and the board. He held in silence for a time that registered as a decision. For the first time in the night his composure saw a crack. His palms lifted, then dropped. All right, Marcus, there was a partner who urged secrecy. I won't name them blindly. I'll walk you through counsel's motion. The fourth external event occurred when Ava tugged a printed paper from a folder and dropped it on the desk. A copy of a transfer order with an embossed letterhead from a Shell subsidiary. It bore a signature block with a scrawl Marcus could not plausibly disown. The scrawl was dated the same night. Ava pushed it toward Marcus. Signatures match internal memos. Marcus, she his name slowly. This ties direct authorization to executive control. Marcus's composure shifted into a new register, something like desperation. Claire saw it in the tightening around his mouth and the way his eyes tracked the skyline, as if searching for an escape. He made a choice in a shallow breath. We move this to the terrace. Claire outside the office. No more windows of deflection. They left the corner office in a group that carried the night's tension with them. The city lay below in its grid of lights. The terrace door opened to wind that took at sleeves and scattered a few cocktail napkins from a nearby table. The rooftop felt colder, open, factual. Claire kept her voice precise. On the terrace, Claire placed the documents on a small table. She faced Marcus and asked a single, concrete question. Did you approve the transfer to that account? Marcus swallowed. He met her, and this time his voice carried a small, private fracture. Yes. I approved it. He, the name of the shell as if it would land differently, said aloud, but it was to protect the company while negotiations concluded. No one in executive leadership profited personally. Daniel stepped forward. Then why that account? He asked. Why that number? Ava produced the security photo she had described earlier and set it on the table. She tapped the profile reflection. That reflection ties an unnamed executive to the screen at midnight. That reflection matches a face we've seen on calls. The transfer left the next morning. She looked at Marcus, who else was in the room. Marcus's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the skyline and back again. I did not personally withdraw funds. If transfers occurred to an account, they were routed through counsel and treasury. His hands hovered as if to emphasize legal procedure. Claire felt clarity sharpen. The earlier emotion of protectiveness had shifted to moral resolve. She knew what transparency would do to people. She also knew what impunity would do. Her choice came down to enforcing accountability now, or letting the company carry a stain that would spread. She had to move. Marcus. Claire, if you resign and allow an independent audit, we can stop further transfers and begin restitution discussions quietly. If you refuse, I will escalate this to the board and to external auditors. Marcus's shoulders squared as if to brace. He looked at Daniel and Ava, then at Claire. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached into a leather portfolio on the terrace table and pulled out a typed resignation letter. It was a small, deliberate movement that ended a long argument. I'll sign, Marcus, I'll sign and initiate council review. But you must ensure this doesn't end the company. Daniel let out a short, rough sound that might have been a laugh. Marcus, the company won't thrive on secrecy. It needs truth for people to trust it again. He Marcus's name with a bluntness that left no room for hedge. Claire watched Marcus take a pen and sign. The signature was calm, the slow curve of a man used to formalities. He did not look relieved when he finished. He looked hollowed in a way that made her stomach take a small, sharp dip. That was the emotional settle. Clarity and consequence wrapping together. When Marcus rose from the table, he put the resignation letter in an envelope and handed the envelope to Claire. Deliver this to the board, he said. Tell them I'll cooperate with whatever investigation follows. Ava nodded. We'll lock and secure all records now. She drew a breath and then pushed 2 phones across to Claire and Daniel. These are saved threads and the security images. We should archive them, timestamp them, and notify council. She addressed Claire directly. Claire, do you want me to prepare a communication plan? Claire considered the actions in front of her. The third major emotion shift, the movement from suspicion to anger to clarity to a guarded relief, settled into the tight knot of duty that had always defined her choices. Yes, prepare it, archive everything, send the account logs to the auditor now. Daniel, gather the staff statements you have. Ava, secure the feeds. Marcus, call the council you referenced and tell them you will step down. Marcus hesitated, then spoke Marcus's name as if to find purchase. I will call council. He lifted his phone from his pocket. The immediate consequences were not theatrical. There was no triumphant music, no collapsing villain in the night. There was one man signing a letter, 4 people arranging files, and a rooftop wind that moved napkins. The facts moved forward. Council was called, an audit was requested, and the resignation envelope sat heavy in Claire's hands. The pace felt both abrupt and inevitable. They returned to the ballroom where the survivors had gathered in a loose ring earlier in the night. The lights were low. The band had packed up. A few stragglers lingered with drinks. Daniel carried a folded jacket he had taken from an empty chair. They placed the jacket on an empty seat at the ring and set a candle beside it. Claire stepped forward and read names from the folded layoff notice Daniel had rescued. She each named slowly and plainly: Miguel Ortiz, pause, Sarah Kim, pause, Ethan Park. Each name hit the small space between people like a pebble in a bowl. Ava, Daniel, and the handful of co-workers repeated names they knew. Conversation softened to a low voice. That act naming tied the earlier legal and moral work to real people. An hour later, after they had secured records and notified council, people trickled out of the ballroom with boxes of belongings and murmurings that would become rumors by morning. Claire stood with Ava and Daniel and watched the staff leave. She felt the tug of survivor guilt among them. The motive of the night, survivor's guilt, was present not as a line of introspection, but as physical movements. People avoiding eye contact, someone rebuttoning a jacket, a hand lingering on a banister longer than needed. Claire touched the envelope with Marcus's resignation in her hand and thought of the list on the desk. She had moved suspicion into action that night. She had forced evidence into daylight, and now the company had a path that might restore some trust. The consequences would be messy. People would lose homes and jobs, and some would find new employers quickly. But decisions had been made. Accountability was beginning. Ava leaned against a column and let out a breath. We did what we could in one night, she said. Her voice was not triumphant, it was factual. Daniel shoved his hands into his pockets and half smiled. We did what we had to. For now, Claire's name, Claire. Thank you. Claire looked at Marcus's resignation letter and then at the ring of empty chairs. The final scene required a concrete act. She walked to the edge of the ballroom and set the envelope on the table next to the candle and the folded jacket. Then she picked up her phone and sent a single, short message to the board. Resignation received. Initiate independent audit. She tapped send, and the small click of the outgoing message felt like the last concrete beat of the night. Marcus's name would be on memos and in calls by morning. The audit would find whether funds moved and whether any person profited. The survivors would tell their stories. Claire felt a tight, functional relief, her duty done for the night, but no cathartic release. She closed her planner and slid the thin gold bracelet up her wrist with a reflexive motion, the familiar click grounding her. Outside, dawn had not arrived yet. Inside, a candle guttered beside a folded jacket on an empty chair. Someone another name, and the ring answered. There was work ahead. Restitution hearings and damaged trust to repair. For now, they had moved from suspicion to exposure to consequence. The final, concrete event of the chapter was a short, unembellished one. Claire stood at the table, placed the resignation envelope under the candle's small light, and pressed the send button on her phone. Ava, Daniel, and Claire left the ballroom together and walked down the corridor toward the elevator. The doors closed behind them, and the printed list remained on the desk in Claire's office, now part of an official file. The morning would bring meetings and statements and the paperwork of accountability. Claire kept her shoulders square. She had carried suspicion into action and made decisions that would change lives. She had followed the facts, and those facts had demanded a signature. The elevator dinged open, and she stepped out into the lobby with the envelope pressed to her side. She looked at her reflection in the glass wall, a woman with a planner, a thin gold bracelet, a deliberate step forward. She pushed the envelope into the courier's hand and said Marcus's name once more, plainly. "Deliver this to the board." The courier took the paper and left. Claire watched the doors close. The chapter ended in action. The resignation letter on its way, record secured, name spoken out loud by a ring of coworkers who would carry the memory of that night forward. The concrete beat at the close was the courier walking away with the envelope, and the light in the ballroom shifting as morning touched the windows. Claire crossed her arms and exhaled once. The work of the next day had begun.